A shank punched through denim. The old man did not flinch. Pool table chalk hit the concrete floor and rolled under a plastic chair. A second shank came up from the left side. It scraped his ribs and snagged on the inside of his coat. He still did not flinch. He set down his paper cup of black coffee on the steel table. He turned his head 1 inch. He looked at the kid holding the second shank. He breathed out slowly through his nose. Around them, the yard kept moving. Nobody had seen the strikes yet. Nobody had heard the cup touch the steel. 40 seconds from now, this whole cell block would know his name. They would whisper it from bunk to bunk for the next 20 long years. They would say it the way men in here say the names of saints. Stay with me on this one. He had been inside for almost 9 years when this happened. His bunk was on the lower tier of B block. His cell was the cleanest cell on the row. He folded his sheet every morning at 5:40. Hospital corners. A flat hand across the top. A flat hand across the bottom. He had been doing that since he was 18 years old. He was 65 now. The skin on the back of his hands looked like old paper. His knuckles were thick and quiet. His shoulders were narrow under his blue shirt. His back was straight. His eyes were a faded gray, the color of a winter sky over a lake. He did not talk much. He did not laugh. He did not lift weights in the yard. He read books from the prison library. He read the same 6 books over and over. A book about birds. A book about clouds. A book about the long retreat through frozen mountains in Korea. A book about beekeeping. A book about a cathedral in France. A small black Bible signed by his wife on the inside covered the year she died. He kept the Bible on the shelf above his bunk, next to a photograph of a yellow dog. The dog had died 11 years ago. He never replaced the picture. The men on the tier thought he was a quiet old guy who had killed somebody once. Some thought he had killed his wife. Some thought a business partner. None of them were right. The court had been wrong about him. The state had been wrong about him. The man who took the stand against him had been wrong on purpose. His official record showed 25 years as a civilian government employee. Maintenance. Logistics. Office clerk. That record was a polite, signed lie. The real record was sealed in a black file in a building outside of Washington. Inside that file were after-action reports from places that do not exist on tourist maps. Inside that file were names of men he had brought back alive. Inside that file were names of men he had carried out of high country in body bags wrapped in parachute silk. Inside that file were 3 quiet citations that had no public version. He had been one of 19 men in a unit that did not have a public name. He had been the oldest of those 19. He had been the one they put at the back of the line. He had been the one who carried the heavy radio and the heavier conscience. When he came home for good, he had a small wooden box of medals in a sock drawer and a wife who was already sick. He spent the next 12 years caring for her. He sat by her bed. He read to her. He held her hand. After she died, he sold the house. He moved to a small farm. He kept bees. He kept a yellow dog. He kept to himself. Then a young man he had once known came to the farm with a problem. The problem grew. It ended with the young man dead in a parking lot 2 states away. The old man had not been in that parking lot. He had been at home with his bees. There were no witnesses for him. There were 3 witnesses against him. The jury was out for 90 minutes. He went into the state system at 56. He never asked for the sealed file to be opened. He never asked his old unit to make a call. He never asked anyone for anything. He believed something most men in here had never been taught to believe. He believed that a man with his hands and his training had a duty to be the last person in any room to do harm. He believed the most dangerous man in any room should also be the most still. He believed his life had already cost enough other lives. He had a small ledger in his head. He kept it private. He had decided, sitting in the back of the prison bus on the day he arrived, that the ledger was closed. The yard was a long rectangle of cracked concrete behind 2 layers of fencing. A basketball court on the west side. A dirt patch on the east where men did pull-ups on a rusted bar. 4 steel tables bolted into the ground in the middle. The old man sat at the second table from the south end. Same stool. Same time. 1 paper cup of black coffee. He watched the sky over the fence. On most days, a hawk came over the fence around 4 in the afternoon. The hawk rode the warm air off the parking lot. The old man liked the hawk. The hawk did not need him to like it. That was part of why he liked it. The gang that ran the south end was called the Iron Hand. They were young. They were hungry. They had taken over 8 months ago after a stabbing in the laundry room. Their leader was a man called Kano. Kano was 34. Kano had a shaved head and a long scar that ran from the corner of his mouth to the bottom of his ear. Kano had built the Iron Hand the way a smart man builds a small business. He found men with nothing left to lose. He found men with debts they could not pay. He found men whose mothers had stopped writing. He gave them a name. He gave them a color. He gave them a place at his table. In return, they moved cigarettes and pills and small folded pieces of paper. They watched the guards. They watched the older inmates. For 3 weeks, Kano had been watching the old man. He had watched him fold his sheet. He had watched him drink his coffee. He had watched him return books to the library. He had watched him sit alone. Kano had decided, the way young men decide things, that the old man was an easy mark. Kano needed a statement. The Iron Hand had lost 2 soldiers in a fight with a rival crew the week before. The block was beginning to wonder if Kano was losing his grip. He needed a name. He needed to make somebody bleed in the open. He picked the old man because he was alone. He picked the old man because he was quiet. He picked the old man because the old man had never once looked another inmate in the eye in a way that said, "Do not touch me." He thought wrong. He picked 2 of his youngest soldiers. One was a kid called Rojo, 19, 8 months inside. The other was a kid called Bito, 22, 2 years inside. Neither had ever put metal into a living person. Kano told them this would be their first. He told them the old man would scream. He told them the old man would beg. He gave them each a short piece of bed-frame steel, filed to a point, and wrapped at the handle with strips of torn pillowcase. He told them to do it Tuesday at 3:45, when the yard was open and the guards were thin and the cameras over the south end were turned an inch the wrong way. They said yes. They were proud. They were scared. It was Tuesday at 3:45 in the afternoon. The old man was sitting at his table. His paper cup of black coffee was half empty. His book about clouds was open in front of him. He was on the chapter about cirrus clouds. Cirrus clouds, the book said, are the highest clouds in the sky. They are made of ice crystals. They look like brushstrokes. They are often the first sign of a coming weather change. He liked that line. He had underlined it once with a soft pencil 3 years ago. He was thinking about that line when he felt the air shift behind his right shoulder. He did not turn around. He had learned not to turn around. He had learned, in a country very far from this yard, that the man who turns around dies. The man who listens lives. He listened. He heard 1 set of footsteps on his right. He heard a second set on his left. He heard the slight scrape of cloth on cloth. That means a hand has reached inside a coat. He heard the small wet sound a young man makes when he swallows because his mouth has gone dry. He heard the click of metal coming free of a cloth wrap. He set down his cup. He turned the page of his book. He let his right shoulder drop 1 inch. The shank from the right side punched through his denim shirt just below his ribs. It went in about 1.5 inches. It scraped along his lowest rib and stopped against the bone. He did not flinch. The shank from the left came up at an angle, aiming for the soft place between his ribs and his hip. He shifted his hip 1 inch toward the table. The blade scraped the inside of his coat. It snagged on the seam. It did not go in. He felt warm blood run down his side under his shirt. He felt the cold edge of the second blade against his skin. He kept his hands on the table. He breathed out through his nose. He turned his head 1 inch to the left. The kid on his left was Bito. Bito held the second shank with a white-knuckled grip. Bito's eyes were wide. Bito was breathing too fast. Bito was waiting to feel the old man scream. The old man did not scream. The old man looked at Bito the way a farmer looks at a calf that has wandered into the road. He said very quietly, "Son, you have made a mistake." He turned his head 1 inch to the right. The kid on his right was Rojo. Rojo still had his hand on the first shank. The first shank was still in the old man's side. Rojo had not pulled it out. Rojo did not know what to do next. The old man said, again very quietly, "You are going to take your hand off the handle. You are going to step back 2 paces. You are going to put your hands on top of your head. You are going to do all 3 right now. And then we are going to walk to the medical wing together, the 3 of us, and nobody else in this yard is going to be hurt today." For a long moment, nothing happened. The yard kept moving around them. A basketball thumped against the chain-link fence. A guard called out a name on the far end. A radio crackled somewhere on a belt. The hawk that came every day at 4 was already circling over the parking lot. The old man could see it out of the corner of his eye. He felt the warm blood spreading along the waistband of his pants. He felt the cold edge of Bito's shank still pressed against his side through the snagged cloth of his coat. He felt the heaviness of the first shank still buried just under his lowest rib. He kept his hands flat on the steel table. He did not move them. He did not need to. Rojo did not let go of the handle. Rojo was breathing through his teeth now. He was trying to decide whether to push the blade deeper or pull it out and run. Across the yard near the basketball court, Kano was watching. He had picked his spot carefully. He stood near the foul line. He had 2 more soldiers on either side. He had a clear line of sight to the second steel table. He could see from this distance that the old man was still upright. Kano frowned. He took a step forward without thinking. He started to lift his hand. He started to give the signal that meant finish it. Then something strange happened. The old man closed the book about clouds. He did it with one hand. He did it slowly. He used his thumb to mark the page with a folded scrap of paper. He set the book on the steel table next to his paper cup. He moved his right hand 1 inch. He laid 2 fingers on top of Rojo's right hand, the hand that was holding the shank. He did not grab. He did not squeeze. He laid 2 fingers there, very lightly, the way a man lays 2 fingers on the back of a frightened horse. And then the old man spoke again, and his voice did not rise, and it did not fall, and every man within 20 feet of that table heard it as if it had been spoken next to his own ear. He said, "Son, listen carefully. There are 41 things I can do from this seat in the next 9 seconds. 40 of them end with you on the concrete. 1 of them ends with you on your feet. We are going to pick that one together." Rojo's hand opened. He did not decide to open it. His fingers simply came away from the wrapped pillowcase strips. He took 1 step back. He took another. He put his hands on top of his head. He looked at the back of the old man's neck, at the gray hair cut short and clean. Bito did not move yet. Bito's hand was shaking now. The shank in his hand was trembling against the cloth of the old man's coat. The old man turned his head 1 inch to the left. He said, "You too, son. Lower your right hand. Set the blade on the concrete. Step back 2 paces. Hands on top of your head." Bito's mouth opened. Bito's mouth closed. Bito looked across the yard at Kano. Kano was 30 yards away. Kano's hand was halfway up in the air, frozen there, palm out. Kano's face had gone the color of cold milk. The old man said, Do not look at him. Look at me. Look at me right now. Bito looked back. The old man's faded gray eyes were on him. The calmest eyes Bito had ever seen on a living person. Bito's hand lowered slowly, as if it belonged to somebody else. The point of the shank touched the concrete next to the leg of the steel stool. Bito opened his fingers. The shank fell flat. The sound it made was very small. Bito stepped back 2 paces. Bito put his hands on top of his head. Now the old man stood up. He stood up the way an older man stands up from a kitchen table. He pressed one hand on the steel table. He pushed himself up with the other. He winced once. A small sound came out of him, a quiet HH, the kind of sound a man makes when he lifts a bag of feed heavier than he remembered. The handle of the first shank, still buried in his right side, moved with him as he stood. He did not pull it out. He did not look at it. He turned very slowly, so that his back was no longer to the basketball court. He faced Kano across 30 yards of cracked concrete. He kept his hands open and visible at his sides. He took 1 step away from the table. He took another. He walked toward Kano. He walked the way a man walks across his own kitchen floor. The yard had gone quiet. Men had stopped moving. The basketball had rolled to a stop against the fence. The guard on the far end had stopped calling. Kano lowered his hand. His soldiers on either side took half a step back from him without meaning to. The old man stopped 10 feet from Kano. He did not raise his voice. He said, "Your name is Kano." Kano did not answer. The old man said, "You sent those 2 boys to do a thing they did not know how to do. You sent them because you wanted a name in this block. You wanted to be a man this afternoon." Kano's jaw worked. Kano's hand twitched at his side. Where the old man could see, there was the shape of a 3rd shank under his shirt, taped along the inside of his belt. The old man saw it. He kept his hands open. He said, "My name is Walter Hollies." He said it the way a man introduces himself at a church supper. He said, "You are going to remember that name for the rest of your life." He said, "And then I am going to walk past you to the medical wing with these 2 boys, and you are not going to follow. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button." Walter Hollies stood 10 feet from Kano with 2 stab wounds in his side, and his blood quietly soaking the waistband of his prison pants. He did not bring his hands up. He did not crouch. He did one thing only. He looked at Kano. He looked at Kano the way a man on a high hill looks down at a small dog on a leash. Kano had been looked at by a lot of men in his life. By judges. By his own father, who was a bad man. By other gang leaders across crowded yards in 2 states. He had never been looked at the way Walter Hollies was looking at him now. There was no anger in Walter's face. There was no fear. There was a kind of patient sadness, the way a teacher looks at a student who has just failed a test for the 3rd time. Kano's hand drifted away from his belt. He did not give the signal. At the gate, a guard's radio crackled. The guard looked up and saw the old man standing in front of Kano with blood on his shirt. He reached for his radio and stopped. He stopped because Walter Hollies turned his head 1 inch toward him, and the guard understood without being told. The guard lowered the radio. He waited. Walter turned back to Kano. He said, "You and I are going to talk later." He said it the way a father says it to a son who has just broken a window. He said, "But not now. Now I am taking these 2 boys to medical." He raised his voice only enough to be heard by the 2 kids. "Roj. Bito. Walk in front of me. Hands stay where they are. Slow pace." The 2 kids walked past Kano with their hands on top of their heads. Kano did not look at them. Kano was still looking at Walter. Walter followed. He walked past Kano at a normal pace. He passed within arm's reach of him. Kano did not move. Kano did not breathe. Walter Hollies walked the length of the yard with the handle of a prison shank still sticking out of his side, with blood running down his pant leg into the top of his sock, with two young gang soldiers walking in front of him with their hands on their heads. 200 men watched him go. Nobody spoke. Nobody whistled. Nobody clapped. The only sound was the dry shuffle of 3 pairs of stay-tissued shoes on cracked concrete, and the slow turning of the hawk over the parking lot, and somewhere far away, the long, low call of a freight train. At the gate, the guards stepped aside. They did not ask questions. One of them lifted his radio. He said very quietly, "Medical B block gate, 3 coming through." Walking. Walter walked behind the 2 kids all the way to the medical wing with a shank in his side, and his hands open at his sides. When the nurse came around the corner of the desk and saw him, she dropped her clipboard. The clipboard hit the tile floor and clattered. The nurse, whose name was Marjorie and who had worked in this prison for 22 years, opened her mouth and closed it. Walter nodded at her. He said, "Ma'am, take these 2 boys first. They are scared." He said, "I am going to sit down." He walked 3 steps to the row of plastic chairs along the wall. He sat down very carefully, lowering himself with one hand on the arm of the chair. He folded his other hand in his lap. He looked at Marjorie. He said, "Please." Marjorie told Rojo and Biteau to sit in the chairs across from Walter. They sat. They kept their hands on top of their heads until Walter, without looking, said, "You can put them down now, boys." They lowered their hands. Biteau started to cry. Rojo stared at the floor. The doctor came in within 4 minutes. He said, "Sir, we need to lay you down." Walter said, "In a minute, son. Take care of those boys first." The doctor looked at the boys. They had no visible injuries. The doctor opened his mouth. Walter said, "Please." The doctor closed his mouth. He went to the boys first. He checked their hands. He checked their pulses. He spoke to them in a low voice. Then he came back to Walter. He helped him to the table. He cut Walter's shirt off. He looked at the wound with the handle still in it. He looked at Walter's chest. He stopped looking. Walter's chest had scars on it that the doctor had only ever seen in textbooks. A long curved scar over the left collarbone. A starburst scar above the right hip. A flat keloid line from the sternum toward the navel. The doctor said nothing. He cleaned the wounds. He pulled the shank out very slowly. Walter did not make a sound. The doctor stitched him up. He checked Walter's blood pressure. He said, 120/76. "Sir, your blood pressure is too calm." Walter said, "It has been a long time since I was excited about anything, son." The doctor laughed once, a startled laugh, and then he stopped laughing. The warden came in 20 minutes later. He was a man of 58 named Lyle. Lyle had read Walter's file once when Walter first came in. Not the public file. The sealed one. A friend at the bureau had quietly let him see 1 page of it. Lyle had understood. He had not assigned Walter to high-risk block. He had not assigned him to protective custody either, because Walter had refused it on his intake form. He had simply kept an eye on him from a distance for 9 years. He walked into the medical wing now. He looked at Walter on the table. He said, "Marjorie, step out, please." Marjorie stepped out. Lyle closed the door. He pulled a stool over. He sat down. He said, "Walter." Walter said, "Lyle." Lyle said, "Are you all right?" Walter said, "I am all right." Lyle said, "Do you want me to lock the block down?" Walter said, "No." Lyle said, "Do you want me to move Kano?" Walter said, "No." Lyle said, "What do you want?" Walter looked at the ceiling for a long time. He said, "I want a meeting in the chapel tomorrow morning." Lyle said, "With who?" Walter said, "With Kano. With those 2 boys. With whoever else wants to be in the room." Lyle said, "That is not how we do things here." Walter said, "I know." Lyle said, "That is exactly how you used to do things in your old job, isn't it?" Walter said, "Yes." Lyle was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All right, Walter." "All right." He stood up. He put his hand once, very lightly, on Walter's shoulder. He walked out. Word travels fast inside a prison. By dinner that night, every man in B Block knew that the old man at the second steel table had taken 2 pieces of metal and walked. By lights out, every tear knew. They whispered the part where he laid 2 fingers on Rojo's hand. They whispered the part where he said 41 things. They whispered the part where he walked past Kano. They did not yet whisper his name. His name would come tomorrow. The next morning at 9, the chapel was full. Kano was there. His remaining lieutenants were there. Rojo and Bito were there. 3 older inmates from the long-term wing were there. Lyle stood in the back with his arms crossed. Walter sat in the front pew, in a clean blue shirt, with a fresh white bandage taped under it. He stood up when the room was quiet. He looked at the men in the pews. He did not raise his voice. He said, "My name is Walter Hollies. I am 65 years old. I have been in this prison for 9 years. I did not do the thing they say I did. But that is not why I asked you here. I asked you here because yesterday 2 boys put 2 pieces of metal into me, and I am still standing, and that is not because I am special. That is because somebody, a long time ago, taught me how to be very still while other people are very afraid." He looked at Kano. He said, "You are not a bad man, Kano. You are a young man who has had bad teachers. I am offering to be a different kind of teacher. For the rest of my time in this prison, I am going to sit at the second steel table in the South Yard at 3:45 every afternoon. Any man who wants to learn how to be still is welcome to sit with me. No colors, no debts, no grudges, just men. That is the only offer I am going to make." He sat down. The chapel was quiet for a long minute. Then Kano stood up. He walked to the front. He looked at Walter. He did not speak. He nodded once. He sat down in the front pew on the other side. The 2 boys walked to the front. They sat down behind Walter. The 3 older inmates stood up. They walked to the front too. Lyle in the back uncrossed his arms. He let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. By the end of that month, the second steel table had 8 men around it every afternoon. By the end of the year 15, the iron hand stopped moving cigarettes through B Block. Kano cut his soldiers loose, one by one, to sit at the table. Walter never raised his voice. He never lifted a hand. He sat with his coffee and his book about clouds, and the men around him slowly learned to be quiet inside their own chests. 6 months later, a lawyer from Virginia visited Walter on a Tuesday. She brought a sealed envelope in a small wooden box and a piece of paper signed by a judge in another state. The man who took the stand against Walter 9 years ago had died in February. Before he died, he had written a letter to a priest. The priest had given it to a lawyer. The lawyer had given it to the judge. The judge had read it twice. The judge had signed the paper. Walter walked out on a Friday morning in the spring. He wore the same denim jacket he had walked in with, 9 years older now. Lyle stood at the gate. He shook Walter's hand. He said, "Take care of yourself, Walter." Walter said, "You too, Lyle." He walked across the parking lot. The hawk was there, riding the warm air. Walter stopped. He watched it for a long moment. He got into the car. He went home to his bees. The second steel table kept filling up every afternoon, long after Walter Hollies was gone. The men called it Walter's table. They still do. Some nights, when a young man is breathing too fast in his bunk and cannot sleep, an older man on a lower tier will say, quietly, across the dark sun, "Be still. Just be still." And the young man who has never met Walter Hollies will somehow know what those words mean, and his breathing will slow, and the cell block will settle, and the night will go on.